the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine wakes up today reeling from a deadly Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Sumy. US President Donald Trump has described Moscow's missile strike as a horrible thing. Speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump said he was told it was a mistake, though he didn't specify by whom. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake, but I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power. This country would have never allowed that war to have started if I were president. That war is a shame.
34 people and injured 83 others, including children. 2 ballistic missiles hit the city centre as people gathered for Palm Sunday. One struck a trolley bus full of passengers. This strike is one of the deadliest on Ukraine this year. The attack comes just 2 days after Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff met Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has invited Donald Trump to visit Ukraine to witness the devastation firsthand. This is what the Ukrainian president also stated.
Цієї п'ятниці був рівно місяць, як Росія відкинула американську пропозицію повного і безумовного припинення вогню. Вони не бояться, і саме тому балістика. Саме тому щоночі під сотню ударних дронів, більшість з яких шахеди. І саме проти звичайних українських міст.
We are now joined by Ruben Johnson, defence correspondent located in Fort Lauderdale, to discuss this further. Ruben, thank you very much for joining us. Donald Trump's famous line on this conflict is that he wants people to stop dying. This obviously comes days after US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff visited Moscow for talks. What do you think of his response so far to this catastrophic attack on the Ukrainian city of Sumy?
First of all, thank you for having me. Secondly, my reaction to what's been said about this war for months and months and months now, when people talk about attacks on Ukraine, what I say is, okay, why is this all passive voice? Why is it that we hear about the devastation in cities? We hear about the people that have died. We hear about the destruction. We hear about, but we never hear about who's responsible. You know, it's always like the ball flew over the head of the receiver, but we don't ever hear who threw the ball. This is Vladimir Putin is responsible for this war. He's responsible for this destruction. His people knew that people would be lined up in this city in Ukraine. They knew that innocent civilians would be lined up for a church service on Palm Sunday, and they deliberately launched this attack. Okay, so what's wrong here? As I've said, it's the passive voice. It's the lack of labeling the responsible parties with the guilt for committing these war crimes. That's number one. And number two is Vladimir Putin has figured out now what the equation is that the more people he kills, the greater the desire there will be in Washington to end the war. But when they say end the war, they mean putting more pressure on President Zelensky, not more pressure on Vladimir Putin.
Ruben, this obviously comes just days after Steve Witkoff was in Moscow. We obviously saw that visual of him shaking hands with the Russian president in St. Petersburg just 2 days ago. Do you think this attack could derail negotiations?
Well, I would like to think that, but I doubt that it's possible that it will happen. Because, and I want to say this is not a Donald Trump problem, okay? This is a problem of every American administration I've seen for more than 30 years, which is that when it comes to negotiations, we always give the Russians the veto on the people we want to send to speak with them, but we never get a veto on theirs. So in true tradition, going back to, I don't know how long, when Trump said my envoy is General Keith Kellogg, the Russians said, oh, we don't want to deal with him. He's too pro-Ukraine. He's too much of a hardliner. And so Trump sends one of his real estate cronies who has no experience in foreign relations. So, you know, these negotiations, you say, could they be derailed? I'm not sure they were ever on the rails to begin with.
Ruben, President Zelensky has obviously invited President Donald Trump to go actually visit Ukraine. Do you think he'll go? What such of a trip do you think that this could achieve if he does?
I'd love for President Trump to see the destruction in this country because I lived there for 21 years and almost died in the war. I'd love for him to see everything that's going on. I'd love for him to see what's happened to so many people's lives and the number of families who've been torn apart because one part of the families had to leave the country. But I doubt that it will happen because I don't think the American Secret Service, the president's security service, will permit that kind of a visit to take place in this environment.
Ruben, what did you think of Europe's response? You've had the Britain and you've obviously had Chancellor-in-waiting Friedrich Merz calling this a war crime. What do you think of the response from Europe, from Ukraine's European allies?
Well, as an American, I'm terribly embarrassed that from the beginning of this war, the United Kingdom has been out in front of everybody else. Boris Johnson was the first Western leader to visit Kiev. The United Kingdom media, particularly the Telegraph, who have a daily podcast called Ukraine the Latest, have covered this war front to back in a way that the American media has not. All of the European allies, not the Germans necessarily, but the United Kingdom, some of the other smaller NATO members, particularly France, President Macron has become an outspoken advocate for Ukraine and has sent some weapons that have been very, very critical in this war, particularly recently. And of course, the French and the United Kingdom are talking about putting boots on the ground. So if it wasn't for the Ukrainian response, I think Ukraine would be doomed.
What is the kind of, you said you were on the ground in Ukraine. What kind of destruction are you seeing there firsthand from the people of Ukraine during this conflict?
Well, the stuff that I've seen, I mean, first of all, we've had entire cities that have been leveled. We've seen immense damage to infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure. The Russians have targeted power plants and other energy facilities so that people would be freezing during the winter. As a matter of fact, if you're in downtown Kiev, sometimes the only sound that you can hear on the streets is the sort of low-level hum of all of the petrol-powered generators that are running because of the constant electricity outages. We're seeing destruction to basically everything in everyday life. I mean, I don't know, can you imagine a country with the size of Ukraine that for over 3 years now, there has been no commercial air service of any kind? If you want to travel from Kiev to Warsaw, which is the nearest major city where you can actually get on an airplane to fly somewhere, it's a 15-hour journey. And this has been going on and on and on. And it just seems to be people are now desensitized. They're either desensitized or they say, oh, well, you know, this is just what the Russians do. You know, this is what they do.
Ruben Johnson, thank you very much for joining us. Very informative.